Hi everyone, this is Bill Dickerson. Welcome to another episode of LVI TV, your dental news source. One of the most revolutionizing factors that have influenced dentistry is the ability to bond restorative materials to tooth structure. The ability to reliably and competently bond a dentin has dramatically changed the conventional protocol and requirements of many procedures. Coupled with the conservative treatment of pulp exposures, this episode of LVI TV will highlight the reattachment of a fractured lateral incisor utilizing the principles of modern adhesive dentistry and the long-term results. In 1994, over 20 years ago, a 23-year-old female came to me with a fractured maxillary lateral incisor caused by a skiing accident. The fractured portion of the tooth, representing about 1/2 of the exposed coronal portion, had been out of the mouth for 3 hours. The fractured piece was amazingly found in the snow immediately after the accident and placed in milk per the suggestion of a ski instructor. Pretty smart. That hydration of the fractured piece may have made this procedure successful. Surprisingly, the patient was not in much pain, even though a pulpal exposure was evident. The fracture had split the tooth in half right at the point of a small carious lesion on the mesial surface of the tooth. The patient was worried that she was going to have the tooth crowned. Now, this was 20 years ago, so it wasn't really done back then, but I suggested we try a more conservative treatment, the reattachment of the fractured piece. Yep, bonding the broken piece back on the part still in the mouth. Again, this was 20 years ago. I knew of no one that had actually done this before, but I was confident in adhesive dentistry as I'd been lecturing on it for the past 5 years at that point. The patient was anesthetized and a rubber dam was placed. The small decay was removed with a small round burr, both in the remaining tooth portion and the fractured tooth portion as well. Understand, I would not be prepping any part of this tooth had there not been that decay. That was not necessary for this technique to work. The remaining portion of the tooth was scrubbed with chlorhexidine for 30 seconds, and the fractured portion of the tooth was placed in a chlorhexidine as well. I etched the fractured tooth portion and the remaining tooth portion for 15 seconds. I avoided etching the pulp, but not for the fear of the effects of the acid on that exposed pulp, but just to prevent making it bleed. And since the purpose of the acid is to demineralize the dentinal surface for the hybrid formation, and since there's no dentin over the exposed pulp, there really was no reason to place the acid on the exposed pulp. I understand that no harm would occur if I had placed the acid on the exposed pulp, so 35% phosphoric acid was the etchant that I used. An anti-inflammatory agent, dexamethasone, was used as a wetting agent, followed by tubulacid red for its antibacterial properties. The surface was left damp, but not puddled, on both portions of the tooth. Optibond Primer was placed in several layers for 30 seconds on both tooth portions, the fractured piece and the part in the mouth, and lightly dried for 15 seconds to evaporate the residual alcohol. After lightly drying, the dentin surface was then checked to ensure a shiny appearance. Optibond's dual cure fluoride resin filled bonding resin was mixed and placed on both pieces of the tooth. Dual cement was a fluoride-releasing microfill luting cement back then, was mixed and placed into the small preparations created by the removal of the carious lesion. This was only placed into the preparations, and care was taken not to excessively overfill. This would not have been used if we had not had to prepare for the decay. The fractured portion of the tooth was then placed back onto the remaining intact portion and was spot tacked for 20 seconds. The excess bonding resin and dual cement were removed using a dry brush. To prevent an oxygen inhibition layer from forming, a glycerin gel was placed over the surface of the restored tooth. The entire tooth was then cured for 2 minutes with 2 lights to ensure adequate polymerization. Light finishing of the interproximal as well as the facial and lingual surface was performed to remove any excess bonding resin and dual cement. Occlusal adjustments were made to relieve the tooth from any contact, and the surface was polished with polishing cups and a polishing paste. Due to a slight dehydration of the avulsed tooth, a slight demarcation between the pieces was evident in the picture. It has now been over 20 years since the tooth was reattached, and the patient is still asymptomatic with a vital, healthy tooth. The tooth is not only still intact, but determination of the fracture site is very difficult. The most difficult aesthetic challenge in dentistry is the matching of a single anterior tooth. By doing what I did, that aesthetic dilemma was eliminated. Reattachment of the fractured tooth structure provided the most aesthetic, natural results achievable. And this case really highlights just how amazing adhesive dentistry is. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and like us. See you next time on LVI TV.
Hunger to become a better cosmetic dentist, I don't think you can.
Cold sores are called fever blisters or herpes simplex type 1. Yep, they're a type of
I never knew when I was going to get a headache, right? And I never knew when I was going to get a migraine. And when you're